When it comes to the history of rock and roll, you'll find that there are multiple timelines. Some say that it began in the late 1940s, and a few even state that it was earlier than this. In organizing this series, however, I decided to start with the rockabilly era, which is the early to mid 1950s. It will be the starting point, and we will go by decade through each one of the age groups. The first age group of the series includes those who left us at age 22 or younger. And ironically, the very first two of the series left us at the same time. Richard Stephen Valenzuela was born May 13th of 1941. He was born in California, the second of 5 children, and from parents who were both from Mexico. He showed an interest in music when he was about 5 years old. Even though he was left-handed, he learned to play a right-handed guitar, and he would bring his guitar to school in junior high and play for his friends. He was invited to join a band called the Silhouettes when he was 16. A different group, not the famous group called the Silhouettes, of course. And around this time, 2 planes collided in midair over his school. The debris falling from the sky into the schoolyard killed some of his friends. He was at his uncle's funeral at the time that this happened, but the loss of several of his friends from the accident stayed with him. It haunted him, and he developed a fear of flying because of this event. A high school student tipped off Bob Keane with Delphi Records that he should come and listen to this young man, and also shared with him that the kids knew him as the Little Richard of San Fernando. He invited Richard to audition at his home, where Keane had a small recording studio in the basement. On May 27, 1958, Keane signed him to Delphi Records. Keane was the person to have Richard start being called Ritchie so that his name would stand out better. He also suggested that he shorten his name to Valens in order to widen his appeal outside of any ethnic group barriers. So Ritchie Valens now began his professional career. By the fall of 1958, he dropped out of school because he was not able to keep up with both school and his career. The song La Bamba became a hit in 1958 as well, and it was followed by Donna soon afterward. He was booked to go on the Winter Dance Party Tour with other notable acts, and this began in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on January 23, 1958. The tour bus conditions were extremely poor, with many getting sick and one suffering from frostbite on his toes due to the lack of heat on the bus. On February 2, 1959, in Clear Lake, Iowa, Ritchie and Buddy Holly's lead guitarist flipped a coin to see which one of them would stay on the cold bus or fly in the chartered plane. Ritchie won and was reported to have said that this was the first thing he had ever won in his life. A short time later, after only an 8-month career and at the age of 17, Ritchie Valens was killed in a plane crash. Also on that plane was Buddy Holly. He was born Charles Hardin Holly on September 7, 1936, and he was the youngest of 4 children. His family was musical, and he appeared for the first time on television in 1952 as part of a talent contest with his friend Jack Neal. They called themselves Buddy and Jack, and of course, when Jack left and Buddy's friend Bob Montgomery joined, they then changed their name to Buddy and Bob. Then they added a bass player, and they got a regular spot on a local radio station in Lubbock, Texas. In 1955, Buddy and Bob opened for Elvis, and Buddy decided that music was going to be his career. They opened 3 times for Elvis that year, and their music began to change, becoming less country and more of a rockabilly sound. In October 1955, he opened for Bill Haley and the Comets. A scout noticed him and helped him to get signed with Decca Records as a solo artist. It was at this time that he changed his name from Holly with an E to Holly without one. And that was because of a misspelling in the contract that he signed with Decca Records. The recording company wanted him to be a country artist, but the recordings were not popular, and he was very unhappy with how things were going. One source states that Decca released him from his contract, but another one says that he couldn't use his name on a release by Brunswick because he was still under contract with Decca. Regardless, he found Norman Petty in Clovis, New Mexico, and they began working together. Petty became the manager of the band, and he sent a demo record to Brunswick Records. They released a song, That'll Be the Day, on May 27, 1957, as The Crickets. The Crickets became the name of Buddy Holly's band. And in October 1957, the song Peggy Sue followed, and in November, the album Chirping Crickets was released. In January 1958, Buddy Holly and the Crickets made their second appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, and then they toured Australia and followed it up with a UK tour. Afterward, the trio added a fourth, with Tommy Alsop joining on lead guitar. While at Pure Southern Music Publishing in New York for a business meeting, he met a receptionist named Maria Santiago. He asked her to dinner, and over dinner proposed, and she said yes, and they were married August of 1958. When Buddy announced that he was moving to New York, Petty convinced the Crickets to stay in Clovis. Buddy still moved and agreed to break up with the band. He found new band members for a tour getting ready to begin. Alsop remained with Buddy, with Waylon Jennings on bass and Charlie Bunch on drums. The tour was officially titled The Winter Dance Party and began in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on January 23, 1959. While Maria had traveled with the band in the past, she was not feeling well, now pregnant, and chose to remain at home. This tour became nicknamed the Tour from Hell. Travel conditions were very poor, and the buses kept breaking down on a consistent basis. They lacked heat regularly, and Charlie Bunch received frostbite on his toes due to the lack of heat on that bus. Many of the tour members became sick with flu-like symptoms also. On Monday, February 2, 1959, Buddy decided to charter a plane to take himself and his band to Fargo, North Dakota. The plan was that they would have the bus pick them up, but that they would be able to get some rest and do some laundry before it got there. Buddy chartered a 4-seat Beechcraft Bonanza airplane from Dwyer Flying Service in Mason City, Iowa. It was to leave directly following the end of the concert, expected to end at midnight. Alsop agreed to flip a coin with Ritchie Valens for one of the seats on the plane, and Ritchie won the toss. The Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, was sick with the flu and complained that the bus was just way too uncomfortable for a man his size, so Waylon Jennings gave his seat to him. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was reported to have not been cleared to operate a plane by instruments only, but it took off in inclement weather with little to no visibility. Not long after 12:55 a.m. on February 3, 1959, the plane went down in a cornfield, killing the pilot and all 3 passengers near Mason City, Iowa. The crash was not discovered until the next morning, but it was determined that all 4 men died instantly from the extent of the injuries received. Buddy Holly was 22 years old. Buddy's wife in New York and mother in Lubbock learned of the news from media reports. Maria learned of her husband's death while watching television and was said to have suffered a miscarriage the following day from being so upset. His mother heard the news on the radio and was reported to have screamed and collapsed. It is cited that because of Maria's miscarriage, in the months after the crash, a policy was implemented that families must be informed before any announcements of a person's death is made public. Buddy influenced many musicians, including John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Bruce Springsteen, Eric Clapton, The Clash, and many more. Lennon and McCartney's pre-Beatles group, the Quarrymen, recorded That'll Be the Day as their very first recording in 1958. A 13-year-old Elton John took to wearing horn-rimmed glasses, even though he didn't need glasses, because of the influence that he felt from Buddy. Bobby V's musical career found success because of Buddy Holly. He replaced Holly on the tour after his death and shows a strong influence from him in many of the songs that he has recorded. Dylan and Clapton both have been quoted as stating the strong influence that Holly had on them. The song Corner Soul by The Clash references Holly. He was one of the first to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, and Rolling Stone magazine lists him as the 13th of their 100 greatest artists. In 1971, Don McLean's album American Pie was dedicated to Buddy Holly. McLean's ballad American Pie held tribute to Holly and the others who died in that plane crash. His reference of the incident as the day the music died has become famous as a reference to the crash and to the deaths of all 3 passengers. Our next video will delve into the same age group, but from the 1960s.